Well, like the title says, I discover a hidden problem, and one that could cause some serious problems if this airplane was in the air. You'll have to watch to find out what it is. Thanks for watching. But first, I start with siliconing those springs. And so, yeah, I've got the red high heat silicone, and I'll be siliconing all the springs. And then moving on to other things.
Okay, as you can see, it has got a bead right across on all of the springs that encapsulates both the spring and the safety wire. Now, the best way to do that, let me back away here so you're in focus, I think, is when you're squeezing it, you sort of have to dab it in there to force it into the spring. So you're kind of doing this dabbing motion all along that wire. And it doesn't look pretty. That don't matter. This part is more function than form. You want to have that silicone wrapped around the safety wire and the spring for the reasons that I explained in the previous videos, that if the spring breaks, even if it breaks in the middle, it'll be glued to that silicone. It'll hold it in place and hold it on the wire so that when you land and you do your pre-flight, and that is a must inspection on all pre-flights, where you take the spring and you just kind of wiggle it a little bit and just check it. If there's a broken piece, you'll find it when you wiggle them, or if you'll notice it, yeah, you'll see it. That's a no-go for a flight. So I have 2 more springs. When I bought these springs, there were 8 in the package, and I used 6, or no, I used 7. Right, I used 7 on this airplane here, and so I have 1 more. Yeah, I have 1 spare, which will be in the toolbox, and I'll also have some safety wire in the toolbox. Now I won't have the safety wire, it's twister, pliers, that kind of stuff. So if I had to replace the spring in the field, I could replace the spring in the field, put some safety wire through it. It won't be siliconed in, obviously, until you get back, but it's one of those things that's very light. So a chunk of safety wire and a spring and a pair of pliers. And if you do have a breakage and you're out away from your hangar, you'd be able to effect repairs, at least on the 1 spring that broke. And then you get back to your hangar and order a whole new set of springs and replace all of them, because if 1 breaks, chances are more are getting ready to break too. So, anyways, that's it for the exhaust system. It is now finished. Let's spin this around, give you a wide angle shot. And there we go. Ooh. Let's take a look from the top. And yeah, there we go. Exhaust system is finished. On to more stuff. So I'll let you know what I do after I do it, or while I'm doing it, because there's a whole lot more yet to get done from the yesterday's or last weekend's video, I think, is where, yeah, how it's working out. Because so let's pitter patter and get at her. Okay, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things I need to do, the throttle cable and the choke cable, when originally installed, the original installer did not bind the ends of the cable. This is pretty common. Most people don't. They don't know that you should. But if you don't, yeah, I'm going to lean this a little closer for a second. You see the end of that cable? How in the world are you supposed to get that through a small hole onto a retaining nut? Well, you're not. You're going to swear a lot, and you're going to twist it and hope it sticks together, and forget it. Now, Here, let me put the camera back here. So what do you do on these things? Well, there's a really simple thing. If you've got a brand new cable, it's very easy to prevent this from happening. And a little side story, when I was 14 years old, I worked in a bicycle shop part-time on weekends, building and fixing bicycles. And one of the things we did was we made cables for brakes and derailleurs and such. Now, back then, this was a long time ago, you could buy the pre-made cables for the bicycles. The problem with the pre-made cable, that they had the little barrels at the end, or the little balls on the end, or just a little nub. The problem with the cables pre-made for bicycles was that there were dozens and dozens and dozens of different lengths and different ends and everything else. And the owner of the bicycle shop said that if he had to buy a cable for every bicycle made in the world that was ever sold in North America, his wall would be filled with cables, and these different cables would sit there and collect dust, and that's money in the bank that's sitting on a wall that goes nowhere. A lot of shops did that, and if they didn't have the cable, it'll take 2 weeks to order it in, or 3 weeks to order a cable in. Okay, fine, they did it that way. But the fellow that owned that bicycle shop never bought any pre-made cables. What he had was molds that made those little barrels at the ends of the cables, or balls, or little nubs. And he bought the cables, both the sheathing and the inner portion, there's different diameters. He bought them in big rolls. And you would cut them and make them custom for every single bicycle. It was more expensive in the short term because there was labor involved. But in the long term, he didn't have hundreds or even thousands of dollars of inventory sitting in the wall collecting dust. And he could turn over a repair in the same day. He never had to say, oh, we need to order this cable in, because he made the cables himself. So he had the molds for the little barrel ends and the ball ends and the whatever else. And I learned how to work with these cables, cut them, and make the ends on them when I was a kid. Okay, warp ahead a lot of years, and here I am again working with bicycle cables, or, well, cables. And I see these frayed ends. Now, one of the things I learned when I was working there was that you never cut the cable, well, there's two things. You never cut the cable with wire cutters that you use for copper, because you'll destroy them. They're steel cable, and they will nick the cutters. If you do it a couple times, you throw the cutters away. There are cutters designed for steel cables that are very hardened, and they do the job, but they're also quite expensive. So if you're going to be cutting these cables yourselves, if you're replacing these cables, do not use your side cutters that you use for electrical. You will harm them. You will nick them and destroy them. Instead, you're going to use a Dremel tool with a cutoff wheel. Wow, yeah. But before you do that, what you need to do is you need to ensure that once you cut the cable, it doesn't end up like this, where it goes, and that's the technical term for it. Is the technical term for that happens to the end of the cable. And the way you do that, well, this is warming up right now. It's going to take a little while. You use a solder pot. This is a solder pot. Now I've got some more solder going in here, and it's heating up now, and it's going to heat up and melt the solder that's in there right now, because I got a big blob in the bottom, but it's not quite enough. So I'm adding some more. And he had one of these, old school style, but this I bought off eBay, and it's made in the countries that starts with a C, but they're very cheap. and you put solder inside there, and you set the heat up, and you let it melt into a molten mass. And the other thing you're going to need is flux. You need to use this liberally, a lot of it, and either MEK or brake cleaner, okay, and a bowl or something. So what you need to do is, first off, you need to degrease this cable, and I mean degrease it. We used a brake cleaner when I was a kid back then. You should buy big jars, that kind of stuff, and you had a little bowl, and you would rub it in there and clean it off and get all traces of grease from manufacturing off that steel cable. You'd measure off the steel cable. You wouldn't cut it. You would measure it off, mark it with some tape, what have you, clean it, liberally apply flux all over it, and then you would dip it in that solder pot briefly, 10 seconds, 15 seconds at the most, till it adheres. You take it out, then you take a piece of 120 grit sandpaper and you stroke it there to get it nice and smooth, the same diameter. Now you cut it. And what happens then is that the solder gets inside that wire and binds it together to a solid mass. So when you cut it, it doesn't go like this when you insert it through. Not only that, it stays bound together the whole time. So this is the little Peter's tips and tricks, is to bind the cable first before you cut it by cleaning it, putting flux all through it, and putting it through a solder pot that has molten solder in it. Now, the solder that I'm using right now, I believe, is a silver-based solder, because that's all they're selling nowadays. Safe flow, lead-free solder. You know, if you've got some old solid plumbing solder in your basement or garage or something that's lead-based, yeah, you're not putting it in water, that kind of stuff. It's fine. Just use that stuff up. If you have to buy it, go buy. But if you can find some stuff that is in somebody's garage or something that they never use again, use that. And the only thing you need to buy in that regard then is a solder pot to melt the solder in. You need to get the flux, you need to get cleaning solutions, and that's it. That's the tips and tricks. Now, once this over here is all frayed up. However, based on where, this is where the bolt ties into. But I'm going to have to twist this together and try to get it into a solid mass again. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to work at this. I'm going to use some wire, safety wire, and bind the very tip of this together once I wrap it. It's going to take some time. Then clean it really well, and once I solder the end of this, I'm going to try to unwrap this, or maybe just cut that last millimeter off, because I'm going to be putting it right at the very tip. And what that'll do is that'll allow me to insert this back into the throttle quadrant, or the choke, whichever one this is, without swearing and cussing and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to solder not just the tip of this, I'm going to solder it back to where the bolt or the nut cinches down onto the cable and holds it in place. So I know some people think I talk too much, but this is an explanation, and it may or may not go in a main video, or I might have a little separate section of Peter's tips and tricks. We'll see. Or maybe it'll be both. It'll be part of this video, and then I'll have another section of Peter's tips and tricks that covers this as well. So you will find out when it happens. So that's it. That's enough of an explanation of what I'm doing. Now I'm going to film it being done, and hopefully you get something out of this and improve the cable routing and management in your aircraft, be it a Challenger or anything else that uses these push-pull cables. Remember, bind it together. Solder the cable first, then take some 120 grit, sand it back smooth to the right diameter, because you're going to have excess lead solder or silver solder on there. Then cut it with a Dremel cutoff wheel. Don't use the diamond cutters. And it will stay bound together forever and make your life so much easier when you're assembling or servicing later on down the line. So, pitter patter, let's get at it. Okay, that's what one looks like. Now it did stay separated out over here, but this is where it gets bolted onto the throttle. And so I'm going to be nipping this last little bit off. And it is now soldered all the way through. I'm just going to hit it with a little sandpaper, it'll clean it up. And this one here is the choke cable. Again, it looks dirty, which it is, the flux kind of, but it is filled with solder now, binding the cable together, so it will not fray anymore. Again, I'm going to just nip just a little bit off the end over here, and I'm going to do that using a Dremel tool, but this should fit through the bolt nicely, and there we go. It looks dirty, but that's the flux. So I'll show you what it looks like when it gets inserted into the throttle quadrant and how easy that is, and how, if this were done when the cable was brand new, it would be just that much better. So, okay, there we go. Turn off the solder pot, and we'll carry on.
A few moments later. "20 minutes later.
Okay.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
20 minutes. Actually, according to the camera there, 25 minutes. That's how long it took to assemble this. Yeah, but it's together now, and it won't be coming apart at all for quite a while. So, good. Okay, if I look dejected, yeah. Okay, so the throttle and the choke cable are now in the assembly, and I went to test it, and it was kind of binding the throttle. So what gives? Why is it binding? So I looked down into the throttle assembly, the controls there, and as I'm pulling it forward and the cable comes out of the sheets there, two of the strands are broken. Darn. That means I need to replace it. That's a no-go. That's if two strands are broken, more will break. So that throttle cable has to be either repaired or replaced. I don't know if you can replace the cable inside the sheath, if it is at all replaceable. If not, then the entire throttle assembly, from the throttle control right to the carbs and the oil injection, will have to come as one assembly. I'll find out later. I got to make some phone calls. But it can't. It's a no-go. So all that soldering and that kind of stuff was great, but the cable was bad and it was hidden inside the sheath. Didn't notice it until I pulled it out to run the throttle to test for smoothness, which, by the way, it wasn't smooth. It was also gummy feeling. So, I guess it's a good thing that I noticed that, you don't want it to snap in mid-flight. Yeah. Okay, so that's going to put a bit of a delay on starting that engine. Yeah, so I just thought I'd give you a little quick update through this video that unfortunately, yeah, it's not going to be quite as well, quick and easy as I thought it was. So, oh well, I had to go get lunch. Gonna eat my lunch and carry on, and we'll be back for more. And there they are. There's one of them. There's a couple that are broken in there. Not sure if you can see that. Oh, there's two. There's probably more. Anyways, junk. Got to replace this. Most likely I have to replace the entire assembly. Not happy. But, hey, it's a good thing I found it here and not while I'm in the air. Got to look in the bright side. Well, but now that I know my throttle cable is pooched, on to something else. That two-stroke oil reservoir that had that foam, whatever schmutz around it. Trying to figure out what's all that about. Well, take a look. This is interesting. There's the reservoir, and there's the fitting, and there was no nut on the back side. This was screwed into the plastic, and then the foam was used to help seal it from leaking. Wow. Okay. Wow. It flew like that. And yeah. Okay. I believe there are some fittings that have a flange on them that let's just peel this off here. Yeah, this is just a 90. But I believe there are some fittings that have a flange that you can put a rubber washer on to seal. If not, I'm sure I can get something to seal this, or seal a fitting in that hole. Wow. Yeah, slight delay. Unfortunate. So, anyways, thanks for following along in my madness and discovery of weird things on a used aircraft. Some really weird things. So, again, thanks for joining me here in the hangar. God bless. And remember, keep your stick on the ice. We'll see you again in the hangar. Bye-bye.
Well, finding these things before I take flight is definitely a plus. I hope you learned something, and if you do buy a used aircraft, do your due diligence, check everything. See you in the hangar again. Bye-bye.